everyone, this is Avani from Hedgecraft Heirlooms, and this week in my live stream, we're going to be talking about the art of ritual storytelling. I think that's what I titled this. And to get started, while we're here waiting for folks to show up, I'm going to be doing a little reading of a story called The Well and the Flame, which I literally just noticed is written by Starhawk, so that's a cool story. Hey, Brooke! Glad you're here. You're the early bird, so I guess you get to hear the entire story from start to finish, so that is a bonus. I'm just going to read this all the way for folks. It's just a cute Imbolc story that I found, and it seemed really appropriate. Since we're going to be talking about storytelling today, that I tell you a story. So, here we go. Again, written by Starhawk. Can't take credit. Starhawk. Soak around, and I'll tell you a story. Once there were two children, a sister and a brother named Bridget and Alex, who lived in a land where winter brought deep snows and much cold. The children loved to play in the snow, to make huge snowmen and dig tunnels in the high banks and have snowball fights. But every year they waited eagerly for Bridget's holiday to come around, for they knew it meant that the days would be getting longer and that someday spring would come again. Again, if you're here watching really quick, I just realized I forgot to announce it. If you want to throw a hashtag live into the comments, or if you're watching on the replay, hashtag replay helps other folks find us, helps the algorithm, fun things like that. But getting back to Bridget and Alex, of course. So one year, winter was especially harsh. Day after day, clouds filled the sky and the snow piled up on the streets. Night after night, a cold wind howled around the corners of the house and blew smoke back down the chimneys. Bridget and Alex grew very tired of staying in the house, for on many days the air was too cold to play outside for very long, even when they wore their warmest jackets with wool sweaters underneath, and snow pants over their jeans, and an extra pair of wool socks in their boots, and all the hoods and scarves and mufflers they could put on. When they did go outside, they were so bundled up they could only waddle like penguins, and they were very tired of making snowmen and snow forts. Again, if you're here watching, throw a hashtag live into the comments, hashtag replay, especially if you're on Facebook, because Facebook doesn't show me who's here, it just gives me a number of how many people they're viewing, and I would love to be able to say hello. Speaking of, I'm just going to open this up really quick.
Getting longer.
Nope, not like that.
Hashtag replay, especially if
there we go. Problem solved. Nope. There we go. Perfect. Anyway, back to the story again. So, they were very tired of making snowmen and snow forts. How long will winter last? They asked their mother. Only the goddess knows, their mother answered. Where can we find her to ask her? Asked Bridget. Their mother smiled. Light a candle on Bridget Eve. Look into the flame and with an open heart. And wait. And who knows? Maybe she will come to you. After all, you are named for her. So on Bridget Eve, the two children lit a candle with their mother's help, placed it on the table, and looked deep into the flame. After a while, the flame seemed to grow and grow until it filled the whole room with a glorious light, and a beautiful woman appeared. Her hair was bright as living fire, her face dark as old wood, her cloak golden as a sunbeam. I am Bridget of the Holy Well and Sacred Flame, she said. Why have you called me, my children? Oh, Bridget, I am named after you, said the little girl. We called you to ask you a question. How long will winter last? Alex asked. Winter will last until clean water rises in the sacred well and the bright flame burns on every hearth, the goddess said, and then she disappeared. What does that mean? The two children asked. They went to their mother, but she could not say. They asked their father, and he only winked and said, That's the trouble with the goddess. It's hard to get a straight answer from her. So they went to bed, unsatisfied. The next morning they woke up early and decided that they would go from house to house in their village to see whether or not a good warm fire was burning on every hearth, and they would ask everyone if they knew of a sacred well. So they did. They bundled up in their warmest jackets with wool sweaters underneath and snow pants over their jeans and an extra pair of wool socks, and in their boots and all the hoods and scarves and mufflers they could put on, and went outside waddling like penguins. From house to house they went, all through their village. On every hearth a warm fire burned, and while people were kind to them and offered them good things to eat and warm things to drink, nobody knew about any sacred well. At last they had visited every house in the village. The only one that was left was the cottage of old man Maddock. which lay across the frozen fields on the very edge of the forest. Nobody liked Old Man Maddock. He was crusty and mean and didn't appear to bathe very often. And he was a stranger who had come from far away. When the children came near his cottage, he yelled at them and shook his big walking stick. And when all the other people in the village were working hard, Old Man Maddock simply sat on his front porch, rocking in his old chair and smoking his pipe. Stay away from him, his parents told their children. He's a foreigner. He's lazy and dirty and probably dangerous. And the children stayed away. But now, from the very edge of the village, Bridget and Alex could see the roof of Old Man Maddock's house. There was no smoke coming out of his chimney. Surely the goddess couldn't have meant we were supposed to light a fire on his hearth, Alex said. I'm scared of him. He'll probably yell at us and shake his fists. His stick, Bridget agreed. But still, I think we should go and see if he has a fire. Just to be safe. So they did, wading through the snow that was so deep, that covered the fields so thickly, they seemed to be walking in a tunnel as high as their head. At last they came to Old Man Maddock's house. The door was closed and there was no smoke coming out of the chimney. Maybe he's not home, Bridget said. Maybe we should just go away. Well, let's look into the window first, Alex suggested. They peered in the small glass window and saw Old Man Maddock lying on his bed. There was no fire on his hearth. Maybe he's sick, Bridget said. We better go in and see. The door was not locked, so they entered the room. It was as cold as the air outside and dirtier than any room Bridget had ever seen. Old Man Maddock lay on his bed, moaning and shivering with fever. We've got to help him, Bridget said. She brought him a drink of water, while Alex took an old blanket and shook it outside and then covered the old man. They ran out into the forest and gathered fallen wood until they had a big pile. Then they lit a fire on the hearth. And soon as the entire room began to grow warm, they found some potatoes and carrots and onions in a bag and cooked up a nice hot soup. And while it was simmering, they cleaned the house and swept the floor and washed the dishes. Finally, Old Man Maddock was warm enough to sit up and drink some soup. Pesky children, he said in a gruff voice. I never did like children. Still, I suppose I ought to thank you. That would be polite, Bridget told him. But what we really want to know is whether you've heard of any holy well around here, Alex said. Holy well, Jingle Bell, Old Man Maddock said. I don't hold with your holy wells. The only well I know of is that old fallen-in well in the woods, and it's all full of garbage. Bridget and Alex looked at each other. Garbage? That didn't sound very holy. But still, it was the only well anyone had told them about all day. I guess we better go look for it, Alex said. We'll bring in some more wood before we go, and when we get home, we'll send our mother and father to take care of you. Don't do me any favors, said Old Man Maddock. But they both felt he didn't really mean it. Once again, they bundled up in their warmest jackets with wool sweaters underneath and their snow pants over their jeans and an extra pair of wool socks and their boots and all the hoods and scarves and mufflers they could put on and went outside, waddling like penguins. They went into the deep forest, following the opening between the trees. At last they came to a small clearing. In the center was a ring of stones, all tumbled down and scattered. They looked inside and saw nothing but a small puddle of frozen mud, all choked with stones and leaves and garbage. Could that be the holy well? Bridget asked. It doesn't look much like it, Alex said, but maybe if we clear it out a bit, we'll be able to see some water. They began prying up the stones and pulling out big lumps of things, which turned out to be cans and bottles and old rotting papers. Bridget took a big stick to clear away the fallen leaves. Alex took off his mittens and scooped out the mud, and soon clear water began to rise through the mud. We can't do much more, Alex said. It's starting to get dark. We'll have to come back tomorrow and bring a shovel. But at least we've begun, Bridget said. You've done well, a voice said from behind them. They turned and saw the beautiful woman and her with hair as bright as flame and face as dark as old wood. You've begun the work, and that is all anyone can do. Oof, I lost my spot. That is all any you can do. Oh, here we go. Is this your holy well? Bridget asked the goddess. Yes, it is. A long time ago, the people of the village tended my well carefully, keeping it clean and dressing it with flowers in the spring. But now they have forgotten the way here, just as they have forgotten the law of kindness of strangers. Without the warmth of loving kindness, how can the days grow warm again? And when my clear springs are choked with dirt, how can the rains of spring fall? We'll remind them, Bridget promised. We'll bring everyone out here to finish cleaning up the well. And we'll make sure to keep a warm fire burning on Old Man Maddox's hearth, Alex added, even if he isn't a very nice man. The goddess smiled. Good. You have lit my fire and cleaned my well, and now I will tell you a secret. Inside the heart of every girl and boy and person is a holy well full of the waters of love and joy and new ideas. This is the well you must keep clean because it can be easily choked by hatred and greed and selfishness. And inside of you is also a fire you must tend and feed and keep burning so that you grow to be strong and wise and brave. Will you do that? We'll do our best, they promised. And now will spring come? Bridget asked. Spring will come, the goddess promised as she winked at them. Spring will come as soon as winter is over. And it did. All right. So that was, again, a story called The Well and the Flame that was originally written by Starhawk. It's probably published somewhere, although I don't know where. She has a series of books that she's published over the course of her career, which is quite extensive. So by all means, if you enjoyed that, you can find Starhawk on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and anywhere you like to buy your books. I'm sure they're there. Again, so because I was in the middle of reading, I didn't get to say hi to folks. If you... Oh, let me get real... If you are here, I'm glad you liked it, Brooke. If you're here and if you're watching, please throw a hashtag live into the comments, hashtag replay if you're watching on the replay. And that said, let us dive into what everybody's here today for, which is the art of ritual storytelling. And in case anybody missed it in that story, the goddess in question was Bridget, of course, which is the main goddess who is associated with the season of Imbolc. So, that said, let's talk about storytelling. So why did I want to talk about storytelling this week? Here's why. So I have this really great quote I want to start with about that kind of helps to kind of summarize what I feel the power of storytelling really is. And it says here that as storytellers, we get the opportunity to step into another person's shoes and see what they see, feel how they feel, experience things we'd never have access to. We get to learn about all the fascinating things going on right under our noses that we never knew were there. And then we get to bring others along on the adventure and, when done right, inspire them to start exploring for themselves. Hey Sunshine and Dreamer, here talking about the art of ritual storytelling today. I just finished a little quote about it. That's Wendy McNaughton, who I don't know who that is, but I found that quote online. So if you like it, you can check her out. But storytelling, I think, has a really strong power to help us connect to other human beings, to understand them on a level that we can't necessarily understand them otherwise or would have difficulty understanding. You know, because when we story uses the power of archetype and theme in a way that nothing else really does. So we find ways to relate to characters, to relate to situations in a way that just being like, oh, well, this thing happened to me doesn't quite convey. So if you put it into story form and describe it in a way that anybody can relate to, it makes it so that people can relate to each other easier. And, you know, at this time of year, late winter, kind of like this is sort of like the cross point between winter and spring. We're kind of like dead right in the middle. You know, at this time, you know, our ancestors, you know, before electricity, before indoor plumbing, before anything, they were stuck inside. They were in these very cramped spaces all together all the time in the same company of the same, you know, handful of people, or maybe if they were lucky, it was a bigger group of people so they could pick and choose who they wanted to interact with from day to day. But the point is it was very limited in their experience and their ability to, you know, socialize. You know, and that made it so that, you know, I think a lot of people can probably relate to that being in a pandemic and the fact that we are all kind of stuck in the same place with a lot of the same people right now and you can't really go anywhere. And I'm sure that you also understand that sometimes when that happens, you guys can start to get a little nitpicky with each other and irritable. And, so the same thing happened to our ancestors too. It just so happens that we can relate to that even better than usual, I think, this year because of the pandemic that's going on. But not only were they stressed about just being together, there was also the stress of having less food, the fact that they were worried about rationing so that they could make it to the end of the winter season. They were also cold. They didn't have indoor heating like we do, so they had to worry about firewood. They had to worry about keeping a fire going on regularly. So someone had to be constantly tending, and it was a lot of work to live through the winter back then. And storytelling and, or a bardic circle is another term that I'm going to be using a lot in here, which I'll get into more a little bit here, was sort of like a pressure valve. That the ability to kind of like sit down together and share and express poetry or stories or, things that help people kind of get that out was really, really important for their mental, emotional well-being. And it gave them a kind of safe space for that expression without, yelling or anger necessarily. I'm sure that happened too, but the storytelling, it increased the likelihood that people weren't going to get as angry with each other in that expression. And it, like I was saying before, it allowed people to step into the shoes of one another and really, experience a level of empathy that might not have been otherwise possible. And, to kind of touch back on the reading I just finished, The Well and the Flame by Starhawk, she said here that winter will last, said back in there that winter will last until clean water rises in the sacred well and bright flame burns on every hearth. And, that sort of, the idea of storytelling is that it helps to clear the air or water, so to speak, and help to relight any flames, so to speak, within that might be growing dim throughout the kind of marathon of trying to get through the winter time. So that said, talking about the why storytelling and what I think the power of storytelling is, how do you include it in a ritual and how can you kind of use that power for yourself? So I like to call the kind of ritual of storytelling a bardic circle. And I'm sure I found it somewhere on the internet years and years ago. I don't remember where exactly, but I do think that it was druidic in origin, which makes sense because bards are kind of a big thing with druids. But again, it's all about self-expression. So, as I'm talking about the idea of storytelling, when we talk about it in a bardic circle, it's not strictly, limited to literal stories. It can also be poems. It can also be songs. It can also be singing. It can be dancing. It can be anything that's creative that you can share with other people that allows you to express yourself, however you express yourself. It could even theoretically be a piece of art. If you're like, I created this art last week because I was feeling a certain way and I wanted to share it with everyone, that's a legitimate thing to share too. Being a bard is more than just stories. And of course, the nice thing about these rituals is that they can either be as formal or as casual as you want them to be. You can cast a circle and, invite in the elements and invite the goddess, or you can just sit down in a circle around a living room or with a fire going in the fireplace or not, and do it that way. There's no wrong way to do a bardic circle because the important part about it is just the act of self-expression. So that said, here is sort of a format you can kind of use for your bardic circles. So generally, obviously each person comes prepared with something, whatever they want to share. Ideally, in a perfect world, it would be something that they created somewhat recently, related to recent events or things that they've been going through, because I think that way it's more relatable, especially if it's related to current events like the pandemic, for example. Ooh, excuse me. And of course, if you're in a particularly small group, people can bring more than one thing to share as well. And of course, instruments welcome. And I love the idea of someone starting a bardic circle and eventually it all kind of devolving into a big jam session. That is also completely legitimate. And so generally, you either, there's a couple ways you can do it. You either start with one person, you kind of go around the circle to the left, and each person just takes a turn, in order. Or you could have people, if you're a group of people where everyone actually knows one another, people can volunteer to have a turn, although not everybody is very forthcoming, especially if you're larger in a public space. Or another thing you can do is that, you can kind of take it more randomly. So let's say that I went first because I was the facilitator, hypothetically. I could point to someone across the circle and be like, okay, I volunteer so-and-so, and then kind of go at it that way. So it's a little bit more random. And I don't know about you, but that kind of dread of going around a circle, and then when they lead up to you, you're like, oh god, I'm next. Well, if you do it randomly, you don't get that. It's kind of like whatever happens, happens. But the other thing too is, in addition to just sharing, things that you create, things that you make, self-expression, it can also be an opportunity to confront people with grievances. So especially if we're talking about people that you live with, or family that you're spending a lot of time with, the bardic circle and the storytelling circle can also be a place where you kind of air your grievances. And I hesitate or laugh to kind of use that phrase, because I feel like people associate it with Festivus and Seinfeld, which is very pop culture. But I think it's a really great phrase. Hey, Rox Witch, we're here talking about the art of ritual storytelling today. I was just talking about structure, that's what I'm looking for, of a bardic circle, which is a special storytelling ritual. And of course, if you're doing anything that involves the airing of grievances, the idea is that, being in a big group, you have the opportunity for mediation and people to kind of approach it from a more peaceful way than letting it just explode out of you at the most inopportune moment, which is what tends to happen otherwise, of course. So like I said before, these can be as formal or as casual as you want them to be. There's no wrong way. If you're doing it in a casual manner, which I think is, like I said earlier, I think that's especially wonderful if you're doing it with a fire. So if you're outside doing it around a bonfire or a campfire, if you're inside doing it around a fireplace, because I think, again, bringing, for Imbolc, especially bringing in the element of fire, I think is really, really lovely, because fire, candles, Imbolc, hearth, all blacksmithing, all the things, fire, I think it's a really lovely addition. And, again, you can sit in a literal circle or not. But then ideally, and this is an important detail, and this is true of any ritual anywhere, and I know this is tough in the modern day because we have this very public, let's share what I'm doing thing on social media, but I think that it's really important for a bardic circle, especially if you're doing it with friends and family, people that you really, really care about, to not have electronics present. Have a basket by the door, have everybody drop their phone. What happens in the circle stays in the circle, and nothing gets shared publicly. It's really supposed to be a safe space, and I feel like no one's gonna feel quite as safe with a phone in the circle as they would otherwise. Obviously, some people need phones for work, but try really hard not to. If you're doing it on a formal sort of way, I think another nice thing to do would be to include, again, a clear container of like a bowl of water on an altar. Again, I think it sort of symbolizes the idea of clearing the air or clearing the water. And then after ritual, you can take the water, because the idea is that the water is also absorbing some of what people are releasing. And then after the ritual, you take it, you can pour it outside as an offering to the goddess Bridget, or just pour it as an offering, however you like. And then some other things, if you're trying to set up an altar, some colors that I think work especially well for bardic circles would be blue for creativity and self-expression, white to represent the snow, so that's a seasonal color, also good for Imbolc, green as sort of an invitation for new life and love, how sort of the idea of how, the bardic circle is sort of like a ritual ceremony of releasing, and then the green is sort of like the invitation of new after. And then, of course, deities that you might want to invoke or invite into a ceremony like this might include Bridget, of course, Bragi, who is a Norse god of poetry, the Muses from Greek mythology, Danu, who is Celtic. I believe that she's Bridget's mother, actually. Ixchel, who is Mexican, South American. I don't want to say that wrong, but somewhere South American. Goddess of art and creativity, Odin, who was actually the Norse god of poetry before Bragi. He gave it to Bragi later. Pan, and of course there are others, but that's just kind of a short list. If you're doing it for Imbolc, obviously I think Bridget is a great choice, because this is kind of her holiday. And then some other things you might want to include on an altar. It might be musical instruments, sheet music, quills or feathers. Think about people used to write with them. Blue gemstones I think are really nice. Think like blue lace agate is like the big one for self-expression for me personally. Lapis and sodalite are really lovely also, or celestite. I didn't write that down, but celestite is another really great one. And storybooks, especially if someone is planning on reading a story, like I read a story at the beginning. Or even if you just have some really cool old antique storybooks, or just books in general to put up there because they look cool, also legit. And things like that, things that sort of represent creativity. It could be paintbrushes, it could be palettes, it could be anything like that. So does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have, I would love to hear thoughts on other people's experience with storytelling, if they've ever been in a ceremony like that. In the past, while you guys are thinking, in the past, I used to run a fire circle, which was, I used to do it every month on the full moon. And it was this time of year, usually February, for the Cold Moon or Wolf Moon. Hey, Luna Court Sage, we actually just wrapped up a little live about the art of virtual storytelling. I'm going to be doing a live sale here shortly of some items that are super slash price for my live viewers, so if you want to hang around for that. And then at the very, very end, I usually do a maximum of 6 free 1-card tarot readings for anybody who claims it while they're here. Yes, I should wave. I just realized there's a couple here that I haven't waved at, so waving back. But so my fire circles I used to do, so usually for this moon, the wolf moon or the cold moon, I would do a bardic circle like this because we couldn't be outside to have an actual fire. So we would have sort of a symbolic fire indoors. We would set up an altar in the middle with candles, and we would go around the circle and we would share that way. And it was really, really lovely. And I think it's just a really, really great way to celebrate and observe, this time of year and work with the energies of this time of year. So doesn't look like anybody has any questions or comments, so I guess that I am going to do an unofficial sign-off because I am going to be uploading this to YouTube. I just realized that I've got this weird... Oh, that's annoying. Sorry, Facebook. I just realized that there's, something in the way here. It's probably not going to go away. Oh, goodness. This, fell down because I touched it. Brilliant. Still too high. Good enough. What was I saying? Oh, I'm going to do an unofficial sign-off because I'm going to be uploading this to YouTube after, and I usually cut off all this end part. So if you're here and you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much for coming. I hope that you find a way to use the art of virtual storytelling for yourself to help kind of release, some of the emotions that have been pent up over the winter so that you can move into the spring renewed and refreshed. So, merry meet, merry part, and blessed be. Mwah.